How do you do it? Is it a special pen? Give it to me now. I'm going to take the batteries out.
Scanning for audio.
Hello and welcome to a Tin Dog podcast. This time discussing Peter Capaldi, Year 2, Episode 4, Story 2, Part 2. Yeah, Under the Lake. Oh yeah. Yeah. You're quite excited, aren't you? You're hoping that this is the new theme tune. You're willing to put up with the fact that the Sonic sunglasses are absolutely ridiculous in order to put this as the new theme tune. I can't see it happening. I mean, let's face it, the end music was exactly the same as always. No, this is a glorious piece of music. And the thing is, my enthusiasm for this new theme tune could override the entire review. That's not going to happen, of course, but I do need to say it's fantastic, isn't it? Now, before I start, I just want to say there's a few bits of news, and I don't normally do news, but I just feel that I kind of need to. So first off, the Tin Dog podcast now has two new aspects. First off, we now have a Twitter feed. It's at Tin Dog Podcast, all one word. Now, it's an automatic account which will link automatically to brand new reviews as I'm doing them. So if there's any Big Finish stuff that's coming out, the sort of stuff that I used to put on the Big Finish forums, that's where it's going first. Then it'll be released on the Tin Dog Podcast ordinary feed eventually. So keep an eye on the Twitter feed and everything should be there, including my entire archive. That, of course, links to the second brand new thing, which is the YouTube archive. Yes, absolutely everything I've ever done with the Tin Dog podcast. Don't worry, the original feed is staying. It's absolutely not moving anywhere. I just wanted a backup. And that's where the YouTube stuff's going. It'll help people discover the Tin Dog podcast who just didn't find it anywhere else. I used to advertise on forums, but as they're going the way of all flesh, it's just not happening. That's my personal news. But of course, the big news, the massive news this week is not class. Yes, the BBC managed to hype something, release something at the wrong time, do the news at the wrong time, and we've all covered that elsewhere. The big news by far is that there is going to be a War Doctor spin-off series with John Hurt from Big Finish. It's possibly the greatest news I've heard. That is a lesson in how to hype something and deliver something. If the BBC had swapped with Big Finish on the level of hype and the actual announcement, that would have been spot on. You would have had a fantastic build-up and an actual delivery. Somebody going, oh yes, we've got something huge coming and it's the War Doctor. The other level of hype, we've got something coming out, you might like it. Oh look, it's class. Yep, you might like it, you might like it. We can't make any more Sarah Jane adventures. Look, watch this, you might like it. Please don't read into the fact that Doctor Who may or may not be on, or we might be making movies instead, or anything like that. Look at this over here, it's shiny. Yeah, all of that business we can cover another time, because today we have to review the brand new Doctor Who, Before the Flood. And of course, we don't just open with a new piece of music. We open with something special, something that isn't actually part of the narrative if you think about it, because at the end of one episode you've got one story and they're going to travel back in time and fix it, and that's what happens at the beginning of this story. So this moment, this description of Paradox, the bootstrap one. Oh yeah, why does he say Google it? No, the Doctor should have said look it up. A script editor should have said that. That's just like saying Doctor Who is now sponsored by Ray-Bans and Google. Google's a company. I know you could always say let's hoover rather than vacuum, and it's the same sort of thing, and it's insidious. But that's just me. So, let's look at this segment, this prologue, if you like. This bootstrap paradox. Now, In judo, bear with me, you use your enemy's strengths against them. Douglas Adams always used this. It was almost impossible to be rescued in space, so he used that to create the infinite improbability drive. Same sort of things going on here. One thing that we, the enemy, that's the readers, and let's face it, every author out there sees the readers of the text, the viewers, the audience, as potentially the enemy. Yes, we're all on the same side in one sense, we're all there to enjoy ourselves, but we are the enemy. So they need to use our strength against ourselves. And our strength, us real hardcore fans, is that we're just a bit picky. We're just a bit annoying. We're the sort of people who go, well, where did that come from? Oh, that doesn't make sense. Well, if you think about it, it's a paradox. Yeah. At its core, this whole episode, these 2 episodes, this whole story is based on this particular paradox. But the fact that the Doctor takes great pleasure in pointing out the fact that it's all a massive paradox, well, who creates it? Now, there is an answer to all this in the Doctor Who universe, and I'm quite willing to go with it. It's that the TARDIS doesn't see time in a linear fashion, but does see things that need to be repaired, and understands these things, and therefore can give the Doctor some sort of leeway, and will prevent him from not going, hence the whole Back to the Future leap thing, which we'll come back to in a moment. Now, like me, you've probably just watched this story. Unlike me, I've watched it 4 times now, but that's not important. What is important is that this is quite simply a superb story. In fact, it's really, really superb if you watch this and last week's back-to-back in a beautiful omnibus edition, like the first regenesis of the Daleks, let's call it that. Like the first story from this season, if you watch them back-to-back almost as a 90-minute omnibus, oh yes, the way that us old school fans are so used to watching old Doctor Who, it's just great. Now, this is the most timey-wimey of Doctor Who stories. It actually has a time travel moment in the middle. 2 of them. In a kind of Back to the Future kind of way. But I don't want to go down that road just yet. Bear with me. So the writer, you know the person with the pens, he's just finished writing The Game for the BBC, which is a Cold War drama. So those sort of things in his head, hence the reason that we end up in this nice lock basin. Now, if you think about it, and this is the sort of thing that happens, there were villages, I'm looking at you, Kielder in Northumberland, which existed for centuries and then were flooded. There are other places which were valleys, which were then dammed at one end, and then water was allowed to trickle. I don't know which of these this setting is. But if you put 2 and 2 together, you're going to end up with the fact that that dam is going to explode at some point, and we've got a pretty good idea what the explosive force is going to be, because it was missing. You know that whole Chekhov's gun thing, when it was loaded last week in front of you. Yes, the explosion is there, but you know what? You're quite willing to go with it, because that's not what this story's about. In fact, you can tell that because of the name of the villain. The Fisher King. What do you know about the Fisher King? Probably as much as me, but let's ask an expert. Let's ask the guy who was in the Fisher King movie, one of my all-time favourites, Robin Williams.
Did you ever hear the story of the Fisher King? It begins with the king as a boy, having to spend the night alone in the forest to prove his courage so he can become king. Now, while he's spending the night alone, he's visited by a sacred vision. Out of the fire appears the Holy Grail, symbol of God's divine grace. And a voice said to the boy, "You shall be keeper of the Grail so that it may heal the hearts of men." But the boy was blinded by greater visions of a life filled with power and glory and beauty. And in this state of radical amazement, he felt for a brief moment not like a boy, but invincible, like God. So he reached in the fire to take the Grail, and the Grail vanished, leaving him with his hand in the fire to be terribly wounded. Now, as this boy grew older, his wound grew deeper. Until one day, life for him lost its reason. He had no faith in any man, not even himself. He couldn't love or feel loved. He was sick with experience. He began to die. One day, a fool wandered into the castle and found the king alone. Now, being a fool, he was simple-minded. He didn't see a king. He only saw a man alone and in pain. And he asked the king, "What ails you, friend?" The king replied, "I'm thirsty. I need some water to cool my throat." So the fool took a cup from beside his bed, filled it with water, and handed it to the king. And as the king began to drink, he realized his wound was healed. He looked in his hands, and there was the Holy Grail, that which he sought all of his life. He turned to the fool and said with amazement, "How could you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" The fool replied, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty."
So I'm guessing that helps make a lot of sense. Basically, the whole point of the Fisher King story is that the answer was in front of you all along. It just needed to be handed to you. And when you know that, as the story of the Fisher King, you kind of get an idea about the plot. Yes, there is one great big time-travel-y annoying moment that annoyed me, and that's because O'Connell had just died. The guy who loves O'Connell has just travelled back in time, and he's just seen her, and he knows she's round the corner, and he doesn't go to run to try and save her. It's a small thing, because if he does try and save her, that messes up the time travel paradox, and it robs us of the incredibly good moment at the end where love is declared. But that's also annoying because, you know what, some workplace romances just aren't meant to live happily ever after. Now, I know this guy probably knows that they're both in love with each other, but it's just a bit annoying. Oh, I've just realised it's a meme. That's the point. The monster in this, not the Fisher King, the actual monster, the words, the message, which is repeated, gets into your eyes and becomes all you can think of, and it redevelops itself and passes itself on, is a meme. It's an actual monster. This is an example of the internet. It's ideas, concepts, and growing. Oh, it's so obvious. Why didn't I spot it all along? I'm such an idiot. It's a message with a life of its own. Definitively what it is. Right. Crashing on with the rest of the review after that face slap moment. I've skipped ahead rather annoyingly, but I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at my notes. Yeah, that Back to the Future moment. It is annoying, but it's nowhere near as annoying as those glasses. It looks like they're here to stay, and you know what? Well, I've discussed them again. I'm sure there are some fans out there who like them. The Verity podcast is reserving judgment. The Who's He podcast are in the same camp as me. They're not a big fan at all. Radio Free Scaro, well, they're torn between holding off judgment and just plain disliking it, same as me. Perhaps it is just the non-podcasters, the non-commentators who love the glasses. Perhaps I just don't know. So yeah, the fairly obvious mystery of the missing power unit, solved, not a problem. The TARDIS solves the whole thing, but the actual Fisher King himself, what a glorious piece of costume and model making. The fact that this guy goes for a walk in daylight and still looks menacing just rocks. Yes, the Doctor gets to point at him and have a little chat in a kind of very, very classic Doctor Who kind of way. To be fair, it's just great. Anything else is just window dressing to a nice review. Yes, it has a classic feel. Yes, I've got issues with things like the Doctor's hologram. But again, we can refer to a different source where all that thing can be explained. Episode 1 of Danger Mouse started very recently, and I'd like to point you in that direction because it's fantastic. But here's something that the narrator says.
Yes, Danger Mouse is back, and all questions will be answered. Like, how exactly does the Colonel's hologram work? I mean, it can walk through walls, but it can be captured by a robot.
Well, that'll be the hard light thingy.
And if it's a hologram, shouldn't it just be copying the Colonel's movements, not doing things by itself? Well, I'm sure the writers have perfectly reasonable answers to all these questions.
I wouldn't bet on it.
To find out, tune in to the next thrilling installment of Danger Mouse.
And I think that sums up everybody's opinion of the Doctor's hologram. It makes very little sense, but it's one of those hand-wavy, it just make kind of narrative sense. But the fact that the Doctor's going around scaring people for no reason, I just don't get it. I'm guessing the ghosts aren't as connected as you would think. And does this mean that O'Connell's ghost only really came into being the moment that she died in order to travel back in time, which is why she wasn't part of the other characters, but of course there's the death. Oh, and then of course, the thing I've not talked about. How dodgy, and I mean how dodgy, is the Undertaker character. Offering up things that could be subjugated with. He's getting positively excited about this sort of thing. Again, it's a bit 50 Shades for my liking, but you know what? It was superbly acted, and everything that was there, I'm sure, was on the page. On the subject of callbacks to the past, for example, that race was in The God Complex, also by the same author. Also by the same author was a mention, apparently, according to Doctor Who magazine. Oh, can I just say, why was the creature photographed in Doctor Who magazine? Like, you didn't get to see the Fisher King for the entirety of the first week, but he was there in Doctor Who magazine taking up an entire page. That's just ridiculous. I'm crashing on, I'm sorry. The other alien race was apparently from Greeks bearing gifts in Torchwood, so I, of course, went away to my DVDs and watched the episode. Now, that alien race is the one that you saw in Sarah Jane Smith, the floaty poet type race. Looking not as good as it used to, and you know it's 10 years on, but CGI really, no, leave it. They look very, very different as creatures. I'd like to go into this in much more depth, and of course there's more seeds. Do you know what would be brilliant, Mr. Moffat, if the seeds of the Dalek Time Lord or Monster Time Lord hybrid were just sown and then ignored, and the seeds here, the seeds for the Minister of War, if those were sown and then ignored for the future? Probably not, because the chances of the Minister of War and the fact that Capaldi looks just like someone from, Children of Earth, who's also a minister, do you think there's going to be a connection there? Probably, but that's not important. What is important is that this story rocked. This story was superb, and I just can't enthuse enough. So with that, I'll say farewell and speak to you all very soon. Be seeing you. You've been listening to the Doctor Who Tin Dog Podcast. Available on RSS, iTunes, Audioboom, Tumblr, and wherever podcasts are found. Why not become a supporter of the show by visiting patreon.com/tindog. Doctor Who and its associated properties are copyright of the BBC and no infringement is intended. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.
Speaking of fans, possibly no other show does devotees like this one. Cue title music. Yes, Doctor Who, another series which has been entertaining fans across the generations. Here is how it was received on social media. Tony Gervin says it's the Emperor's new clothes, describing the latest episodes as confused and messy, while Jack Long disagrees, saying the chemistry between the Doctor, Missy and Clara was quality. He felt this was the best ever opening to a series. Nick Murray says it's back on track, but Diana is disappointed, very disappointed, asking when is Doctor Who getting a new showrunner? So a really two-sided response there. Now Doctor Who fans are in a league all of their own, and when you ask Whovians, as they call themselves, what they think of the show so far, I tell you what, you get what you asked for.
I am really loving the fact that it's back on TV. What are my impressions of the first 2 episodes? I thought they were incredible.
Judging from the 2 episodes of the new series, I feel as though Doctor Who is in trouble. The story centred on the Doctor and his old enemy, Davros. I felt that the plot was too complicated and very difficult to understand. We were left wondering what was going on and how children would understand it.
Generally speaking, if adults say that science fiction is too confusing for children, what they actually mean is that it's too confusing for them.
Maybe Doctor Who viewers need a higher IQ these days.
Pardon my sci-fi, but this is beyond any human technology.
In the second episode, there was a lot of time taken up by some very dark scenes between the Doctor and Davros.
Incredibly intense. They were very well written, they were very well played.
Did you doubt it?
Yes. I thought that those 2 acted their socks off in those scenes. And Peter Capaldi, in particular, has really taken control of the part of the Doctor.
In my opinion, Doctor Who is no longer a family show, bringing excitement to children. I miss the old style Doctor Who. Please bring him back.
I think it is not only as good as it once was, it's actually better than it often was, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the series goes from here.
Someone is watching.
If you have a comment on Doctor Who or any TV on the BBC, there is a galaxy of ways to get in touch by email, pov@bbc.co.uk, or on Twitter @BBCPOV, or Facebook. Just look for Points of View and like us for daily TV clips.